Let's face it, the Buffalo Trace Antiques collection is really hard to come by. Unless you're a YouTuber like me, you probably don't have like the connections to be able to pull it off. And I'm sorry for that. If I could help all of you guys get a Buffalo Trace Antiques collection bottle, I would. But I can't. So, what are the best Buffalo Trace Antiques collection alternatives for 2024? Let's go.
I'm your drinking buddy.
All right, drinking buddies. So, cards on the table. Buffalo Trace's Antiques collection is really freaking good, but it's also really freaking hard to get. In fact, nearly impossible to get, unless you want to pay ridiculous secondary prices or even more ridiculous museum liquor store prices, which are often double or triple what secondary is. So recommendation one, if you're considering paying that ridiculously high museum liquor store price, check your local secondary first, because chances are you can get it from somebody in your secondary who is charging too much, and you probably shouldn't buy it from them. But if you're dead set on buying that bottle of whiskey, buy it from somebody in your community instead of one of those museum stores, because one of those museum stores that's charging, $2,000 for a George T. Stagg, it can be had for less than half of that on your local secondary, I assure you. Anyway, I also want to try to keep these alternatives to reasonable things that you could find. WLW, for example, some great alternatives for that would be Maker Cellar Aged or Found North Batch 10. But those are arguably, well, they're not as hard to find, but they're too hard to find. They're too hard to find. They're in this same category, and they're probably on par with WLW, especially the Found North Batch 10. But they're unicorns as well. They're very hard to find. So we got to find things that are easier to find with a few caveats, and I will explain when I give you those caveats. And you know what? Let's just go ahead and start with William Larue Weller, because it's the hardest one to give you recommendations for, because at about a 12-year-old barrel-proof wheated bourbon, yeah, there are no non-unicorns on the market that fit that spec. And ADHD Whiskey did a video about a year ago or so where he recommended alternatives for Buffalo Trace products, but then he just recommended other Buffalo Trace products because, they're going to taste more similar. And I made a response to that where I was basically saying, you're not helping anyone by recommending those bottles, which is why I'm going to say this is not helping anyone, but it is a little bit easier to get than the WLW. And this is going to be the hardest bottle to find that I point out today. I assure you, every other bottle is much easier to get. Blanton Straight from the Barrel is actually closer to a WLW than nearly all non-Buffalo Trace wheaters. Similar, it's got the same yeast strain, aged at the exact same facility. They're using the same barrels. That matters. That matters a lot. And it makes for a whiskey that it's not a wheater, but it drinks similar to WLW. So that's my one hard whiskey to find on this list. Everything else should be things that you can find. Now, we got to give you one that's easier to come by. And you can buy this right now, actually. I haven't bought it yet. I know, cards on the table, I haven't bought it yet. But I bought way too much whiskey in the months of November and December, so I have to wait a little while before I can buy it. But I am going to buy this one. It's Limestone Farms Private Batch, and it is a wheater, and it is $190 on their website, but there's a 15% promo code LF15. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is some sort of like paid advertisement. It's not. These guys sent me a sample. I have no obligation to tell you I like it. I'm telling you it's excellent, and it is amazing, and it's WLW adjacent, and you can go online and buy it right now, and they ship to 48 states. So if you want a WLW at a fraction of the cost, that's a good way to get it. Once again, they're not paying me to say that. And you might buy it and love it, and there's a chance you could buy it and hate it. Everyone's palate's different, but it's pretty darn close to WLW in my opinion, especially for something that you can buy right now. All right, and then I have to give a shellfish bottle for this because I feel like I recommended a unicorn and something that's $200. Well, $190 with 15% off, but so like around $160. But I got to throw a shelf one in here because shellfish. I mean, let's be honest here. Barrel-proof wheaters, they just don't sit around on shelves. Anyway, I think that a decent alternative. Now, this once again is not the same whiskey as WLW. It's probably not even close, but I think it's in that ballpark where you're getting similar flavor profiles is the Bernheim at barrel proof. And the Bernheim at barrel proof is about 9 years old, and this one is 125.2 proof. So it's got wheat in the mash bill. There's no rye. It's barrel proof. It's over 8 years old. This is 9 years old. The WLW is 12. There are some similar things going on here. What are you going to get that's different? This is a little bit more wheat forward, where you're going to get a little bit more of those like grainy hay things. You're going to get a little bit more of the like appley thing, where this one's more cherry. You're going to get a little bit more peanut butter on here, but it's pretty close. Next up, I think we should go to Saz 18. And this is a very difficult one because, like WLW, there are no 18-year-old freaking Kentucky straight rye whiskeys sitting on shelves. There's nothing close to Sazerac rye that you can just walk into a store and buy. There's just nothing even remotely close. So I'm giving you two that are going to give you similar flavor profiles without giving you that age necessarily. So first, just grab a bottle of Sazerac rye, regular Sazerac rye, drop a barrel spiral in it. Link in the description. You can buy the barrel spirals that I use. And you're going to get an older, it's basically a double oaked Sazerac rye, but it drinks much older than Sazerac rye. So you get similar flavors at the same proof with the same distillate. So this is as close as you can get to a Saz 18, is dropping a barrel spiral into a Sazerac rye. Is it as good as Sazerac rye? No, because if it was, everyone would do that, and then they would have, Sazerac rye goes for over $1,000 on secondary for a reason. But this gets you, 70% of the way there, I think. And next up, I got to give you one that you can just, not everyone's for home aging, so I got to give you one that you can just walk into a store and buy on the shelf. That's not a unicorn, but it's not even close to the age. But I do think you get some of the same flavors, and it's comparable to me. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments. The New Riff 100% malted rye, it's 6 years aged, so I know that's not 18, but at 100 proof, and I feel like you get a lot of the same flavors that you get off the Saz 18 with less oak. So there's less oak here, I will admit that, but you're going to get the same red licorice. You're going to get the same cherry notes. You're going to get the same subtle spice. There's not a ton of spice on this, despite it being 100% rye. This is just a beautiful whiskey. In fact, we're going to drink a little bit of this while we finish up this list. Next up, we're going to go to Eagle Rare 17. And I feel like this is actually an easy one because I feel like there are actually a few semi-overlooked older bourbons out there that are real Kentucky real Kentucky juice that are in that ballpark around that same proof point. So it's 101 proof. And first, this one is hard to find. So I'm freely admitting, knob 18, hard bottle to find. 100 proof, it's 18 years old. This is a beautiful whiskey. It's hard to find. It's nowhere near as hard to find as Eagle Rare 17. So keep that in mind. But if you can find that one, Callum at 16 sits on a lot of shelves. Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It's 16 years old, has rye in the mash bill, 106 proof. That is as close as you can get to an Eagle Rare 17 that you can just walk into a store and buy. In fact, I might argue, I might like this better. I'm just saying that. Shots are fired. I know. Careful before you unsubscribe. Just tell me how much you hate me in the comments before you do. But this is an amazing whiskey that I think is so overlooked. Next, we're going to go to Thomas Handy. And I think that this is one that is harder to do because I find Thomas Handy to be so much better than other ryes. It's kind of insane to me. This is my personal flavor profile. Meanwhile, you can find whiskeys that are similar to an Eagle Rare 17. You can find whiskeys that are similar to a WLW. I would say more similar to it would be Found North Batch 10 or a Maker's Mark Cellar Aged. But those are unicorns. So anyway, it's possible to find whiskeys that are similar to this. Whereas with Sazerac rye, it's just it's so much better than other ryes. Anyway, I digress. I think that Hard Truth's Sweet Mash Rye is one that I think comes fairly close. Now, this is only a 4-year rye, and it is a store pick, but At 118 proof, this thing blows me away every time I taste it. This bottle, I have not had that long, and it's almost gone because I love it. And it is great. Lots of similar flavor profiles to Thomas Handy, where it's just like brown sugar, cherry, licorice spice bomb, and I love it in every way. And then for a shelf alternative, this should be something you can walk into stores and buy in most areas. I know this was allocated for a while, but it's not anymore. Just the Jack Daniel's single barrel proof rye is, I think, about as close as you can get. This one happens to be a pick, but it doesn't have to be a pick. They're about as good as you can get when it comes to rye. So those two definitely are there. All right, we have one left, George T. Stagg, which a lot of people would say is the peak of the BTAC line, which is kind of why I saved it for last. I think it might be most years the best of the three, unless it's an extra special year for Handy or an extra special year for WLW. The GTS every single year is going to be just a straight up banger. Whereas, there's kind of down years for WLW. This is true. If you get a good WLW, it's going to blow you away. But GTS is amazing every year. I mean, so is WLW, but there's variances. You guys get me. Anyway, I think it's the closest you can get for a 15-year whiskey. I know, hear me out. This is a little bit of a weird choice, but I think it works. There's a lot of these Bull Run picks that are 15 years old that are aged in another barrel. So this one's Pinot Noir. That one's not quite as close, but I think this one that's Naccio finished, which is a walnut liqueur finished, I think that's about as close as you can get to something that's like George T. Stagg adjacent. It's a similar proof point where, well, I mean, not quite as high as George T. Stagg. This is 115.2 proof, but yeah, that Nacino finish really just does something to this. This is an American light whiskey out of MGP, 99 corn, 1% malted barley. But when it's finished in that Nocino barrel, it just does something to the whiskey that makes it taste George T. Stagg adjacent. I don't know how to explain it. If you can also get the 99.1 out of MGP, over 10 years old, you're going to have something that's not George T. Stagg, but it's George T. Stagg adjacent. So I would recommend looking for Bull Run light whiskey picks finished in another barrel. They're going to give it that extra oak thing, and they're going to be fairly close. And then I got to give a shelf one for George T. Stagg because I think that there's just, and it's not exactly a shelfer. It's similar to the Spurenheim or even the Jack Daniel's, whereas it can be kind of hard to find sometimes. Depending upon your area, this could be hard to find. But depending upon your area, these probably sit on shelves a lot. Anyway, this should be a shelf bottle. It's amazing. They're often overlooked, and they are George T. Stagg adjacent sometimes. Look at last year's C923. Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. I think that these can be George T. Stagg adjacent. They're not as good as George T. Stagg. They never will be. The best Elijah Craig Barrel Proof I've ever had, I don't think could touch a George T. Stagg. But they're in that ballpark. A really good Elijah Craig Barrel Proof will blow you away. So, especially if you can get a store pick that's done by somebody you know that has a flavor profile that agrees with your flavor profile, you can end up with something you'll love. Anyway, drinking buddies, these have been my recommendations. This one with a caveat. I think I'll just remove this from the table so I get less hate. These are, I'm intending to make whiskeys that are easier to find than BTAC for 2024. What do you recommend to the audience to be a great BTAC alternative? Tell me down below in the comments. Have you had BTAC? Did it blow your mind? Did it let you down? Tell me down in the comments. Anyway, I really appreciate all of you. Every time you guys like these videos, every time you guys subscribe to the channel, you make this thing possible. I could not do this without you. And I just realized I poured this new riff. I haven't even had a sip. So we got to do that real quick. I stand by this choice. This is Saz 18 adjacent without the oak. Cheers.